Today, we are going to do something different. We're going to look at a map. It may seem simple, but if you look closely, it holds a story so grand it will blow your mind. Let me introduce you to the Golden Age of Spain, the era when Spain became the first modern global empire. Our story begins in the 15th century when Spain was not one country, but a patchwork of kingdoms. But in 1469, two rulers, Ferdinand and Isabella, joined their domains, setting the stage for greatness. They forged a powerful alliance, uniting Spain under the banner of Christianity. Ferdinand, the King of Aragon, brought naval strength and a taste for exploration to the table. Isabella, the Queen of Castile, offered political savvy and a fierce commitment to her faith. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. The couple's dream of a united Spain was realized when they seized Granada in 1492, marking the end of Muslim rule in Iberia. This victory wasn't just a territorial gain, it was a statement. Spain was now firmly Christian. But the celebrations were cut short by a looming threat from the rising Ottoman Empire. The Turks were poised to seize control of the Mediterranean, threatening vital trade routes to the Americas. To counter this, Ferdinand and Isabella turned to the sea, investing in a daring mission led by a man named Christopher Columbus. On October 12, 1492, Columbus and his crew sighted land, believing they had reached India. Little did they know they had stumbled upon the shores of the Bahamas. This marked not just a personal triumph for Columbus, but a monumental moment for Spain. The Americas were now open to exploration and conquest, territories brimming with gold, spices, and most importantly, immense wealth. By the early 16th century, Spain had established formidable bases in the New World. Cities like Santo Domingo, the first European settlement in the Americas, hummed with activity. And in 1521, Hernán Cortés, a Spanish conquistador, conquered the Aztec Empire, opening up central Mexico to colonization. By 1535, Francisco Pizarro led the conquest of the Inca Empire in Peru, gaining control over the richest areas of South America. Within a century, Spain had transformed from a small European kingdom to the ruler of a vast global empire. But how did Spain manage to achieve this? What factors contributed to its meteoric rise? One significant advantage Spain enjoyed was the support of the Catholic Church. The Church viewed Spain's expansion as a crusade against non-Christians, imbuing the empire with a sense of divine purpose. This religious zeal drove the conquistadors to conquer and convert, often with brutal efficiency. Spain's success also lay in its organizational structure. The empire was highly centralized, with the king holding supreme authority. This allowed for efficient resource allocation and the implementation of uniform policies across the empire. Moreover, Spain's use of mercantilism, an economic system that emphasized the accumulation of wealth through trade and colonies, proved highly effective in extracting resources from the Americas. However, Spain's path to domination was not without its challenges. The constant warfare with rivals like Portugal and France drained the treasury, and the influx of wealth from the Americas led to inflation. Additionally, the empire's vast size and the lack of efficient transportation systems made it difficult to govern effectively. Yet perhaps the most significant threat to Spain's dominance came from within. The encomienda system, which granted conquistadors control over indigenous labor forces, resulted in the brutal exploitation of native populations. This, along with the introduction of African slaves to the Americas, had devastating consequences for indigenous societies. As native populations declined, Spain's colonial ambitions began to face headwinds. By the 17th century, Spain's rivals, including Britain, France, and the Dutch, started to challenge its dominance. The loss of territories and the decline of its navy marked the beginning of Spain's decline. So there you have it, the map of the Golden Age of Spain, a testament to a nation that dared to dream big, conquer vast territories, and create a global empire. But remember, empires are like the tides, ebbing and flowing with the currents of history. Spain's story serves as a reminder that even the mightiest of empires are not immune to the winds of change. When you think of ancient civilizations, you may picture towering pyramids or great walls. You might think about pharaohs or emperors who lived thousands of years ago. But what if I told you there was an empire that stretched from the Arctic to the Antarctic? An empire built on treasure? The news of Columbus's voyage spread quickly. Soon, explorers and adventurers rushed across the ocean under the Spanish crown. Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico. With only a few hundred men, he marched into the heart of the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs, ruled by Emperor Moctezuma, were powerful and feared. Their warriors wore fierce armor and carried sharp weapons. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was a magnificent site with grand temples and bustling markets. But the Aztecs also had enemies. As Cortés traveled across Mexico, he made alliances with the enemies of the Aztecs. Together they fought against the Aztec Empire. Within just 2 years, Cortés and his men, with the help of local allies, destroyed their empire. Further south, Francisco Pizarro faced the mighty Inca Empire. The Incas ruled the Andes with advanced cities, roads, and armies. Their capital, Cuzco, was a center of trade and culture. Their roads allowed for swift movement of soldiers and merchants, and their armies were well organized and disciplined. But civil war and European diseases weakened them. Pizarro captured Emperor Atahualpa, demanded a ransom of gold and silver, and then executed him. Within a few short years, the Inca Empire was gone. From Mexico to Peru, Spain now controlled lands rich in people, resources, and treasures. Ships loaded with silver and gold sailed back to Spain, filling its royal treasury. Back in Europe, people marveled at the riches. They inspired artists, writers, and scientists to explore and conquer more lands. Silver and gold from the Americas transformed Spain into the wealthiest kingdom in Europe. Vast amounts of silver from Potosi in Bolivia and Zacatecas in Mexico fueled Spain's rise. Other empires envied this newfound wealth, though. Soon, rival powers sought their own treasures in the New World. England, France, and Portugal explored and claimed lands in North America. They established settlements and began extracting resources. But Spain had a head start. It built mighty armies and powerful navies. Its ships dominated the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. These forces protected Spain's vast empire and suppressed rebellions. Spain also developed large plantations worked by African slaves. They grew crops like tobacco, sugar, and coffee. This created a triangular trade route. European manufactured goods went to the Americas. Slaves from Africa arrived in the Americas, and the riches of the Americas returned to Europe. By the early 1500s, Spain had become the wealthiest kingdom in Europe. Imagine living in a world where one nation has most of the gold and silver. Rulers courted the Spanish, hoping for an alliance. Kings and queens sent their children to Spain for an advantageous marriage. Commoners dressed in the latest fashions from Spain, and nobles competed to have the finest Spanish art and architecture. Influenced Spain's power, wealth, and culture. The riches of the New World had transformed Europe. But how did Spain protect all this wealth? The answer lies in the open seas. The riches of the New World allowed Spain to build mighty armies and powerful navies. With this wealth, Spain could shape the destiny of Europe. For example, Spain defeated the Dutch in the battle for world dominance. It also explored and conquered the Philippines. With its vast wealth, Spain became a formidable empire. The treasure fleets, though the riches of the New World filled Spain's coffers, it wasn't without risks. The journey across the Atlantic was fraught with peril. Pirates and rival nations coveted the riches too. So to protect these shipments, Spain created the famous treasure fleets. These were heavily armed convoys that crossed the ocean in formation. Every 3 months, a fleet would depart from Spain laden with supplies and soldiers for the New World. On the return journey, they would bring back treasure and more soldiers. The treasure fleets were not just about riches, they were about security. In the end, the age of conquests brought immense wealth to Spain, but also sparked rivalries that would change the course of history. The race for riches in the New World had begun, and Spain wasn't the only player. England, France, and Portugal were eager to claim their share of the treasure. The world was about to enter a new era of exploration and conquest. What did you find most interesting about the Treasure Empire? Let me know in the comments below. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about Spain? Is it paella, flamenco, or maybe the beautiful Spanish architecture? For many, Spain conjures images of a vibrant culture. But did you know that Spain had a golden age during the 16th century? So let's travel back in time to explore the golden age of Spain. It was said that the sun never set on its empire, because somewhere on some continent, Spanish power was always present. From Florida to Manila, the Spanish flag was a symbol of wealth and power. Spain ruled territories in Europe, the Americas, parts of Africa, and even Asia. The Philippines in Southeast Asia became another jewel in its crown. At home, this wealth gave rise to a cultural explosion. Writers like Miguel de Cervantes, author of Don Quixote, reshaped literature. Artists like El Greco and later Diego Velázquez created masterpieces that still inspire the world. Magnificent cathedrals and palaces rose across Spain, symbols of its glory. Faith also played a role. Spain became the defender of Catholicism. It fought against the Protestant Reformation spreading through Europe. For the Spanish monarchy, empire and religion went hand in hand, but power brings enemies. Spain's growing empire threatened other nations. France, England, and the Ottoman Turks all became rivals. In 1588, King Philip II launched the Spanish Armada, a massive fleet meant to invade England. But storms and English resistance crushed it. The Invincible Armada was defeated, marking a turning point in naval history. In Europe, Spain fought constant wars, draining its resources. Its wealth from the Americas was vast, but wars consumed it quickly. Imagine this. You find a magic lamp, and a genie appears. He offers you 3 wishes. You wish for untold riches beyond your wildest dreams. Your life changes in an instant. Palaces become your home, and gold becomes as common as pebbles on a street. But after a while, those riches start to lose their shine. Servants demand higher wages, new taxes appear, and soon your life is more complicated than before. That's what happened to Spain, too. As silver flowed in, prices rose. Inflation weakened the economy. Ordinary Spaniards saw little benefit from the empire's treasures. They say gold does not buy happiness, and Spain's story proves it. Despite the troubles, Spain continued to explore and conquer. In 1521, Spanish conquistadors took over the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, and looted its immense wealth. Meanwhile, back in Spain, people questioned the cost of empire. Was the bloodshed and expense in Asia and America worth it? Some thinkers argued for a simpler life, a return to the old ways. This change in thinking was not just in Spain. Across Europe, new ideas were taking root. The Renaissance had begun in Italy, and now it was shaking the rest of the continent. People started questioning long-held beliefs. They looked back at ancient Greek and Roman ideas. The arts and sciences flourished. Thinkers like Erasmus and Thomas More wrote about reforming society. They dreamed of a better world. For ordinary people, life was tough. The Black Death had killed millions. Food was often scarce, and life was hard. But despite the difficulties, new freedoms appeared. As towns grew, people had more choices. There were more jobs, but also more poverty. People started to move from the countryside to cities in search of work. But these urban areas were crowded and unsanitary. Crime and poverty became big problems. In the face of these challenges, great thinkers and reformers emerged. They offered new ideas to improve people's lives. They debated how to make society better, fairer, and more just. The stage was set for a new era in European history. The old way of life was under question. Seeds of change were planted. Meanwhile, in the New World, Spanish rule reshaped societies. Native populations suffered greatly. Millions died from diseases brought from Europe. Others were forced into labor in mines and plantations. At the same time, Spanish culture, language, and religion spread widely. Catholic missions built churches and converted indigenous peoples. Spanish became the language of administration, trade, and daily life, a legacy still alive today across Latin America. The colonies became central to Spain's identity as an empire, but also the source of resistance that would later challenge it. The long decline. By the 17th century, cracks in the empire grew wider. Spain was fighting too many wars, from the Netherlands to Italy to the Americas. The 30 Years' War drained its strength. The Dutch won independence from Spanish rule. England and France rose as new superpowers, challenging Spain's dominance. The endless flow of silver could no longer cover Spain's debts. Corruption, heavy taxation, and poor leadership weakened the kingdom from within. In this video, we're going to look at how Spain lost its empire. So let's get started. As we discussed in our last video, by the 1600s, Spain ruled a huge empire across 3 continents. Its vast holdings in the Americas were the source of great wealth and power, but the empire's problems ran deeper than the Atlantic. Let's begin with the mighty fortress of Madrid. Once the seat of a vast empire, today it is home to around 3.3 million people. As we discussed in our last video, Spain's population had been devastated by disease brought from the Americas. And by the 17th century, the country was feeling the effects of this demographic collapse. Spain's economy was built on agriculture and the labor of its people. But with fewer people to work the fields and fewer soldiers to defend the realm, the country was in trouble. But it wasn't just Spain's population that was declining. By the 1600s, the Spanish monarchy was deep in debt. The cost of maintaining a vast empire was enormous, and the Spanish crown was running out of money. As a result, taxes were high, and the people were unhappy. But perhaps even more importantly, Spain's empire was being challenged by new rivals. The Dutch Republic, England, and France all had their eyes on Spain's North American colonies. The Dutch, in fact, launched a surprise attack on the Spanish colony of New Netherlands, capturing it and renaming it New Amsterdam. Then there was England, which had long coveted Spain's treasure-rich colonies. In 1588, England's Queen Elizabeth I had even launched an invasion of Spain, though it had ended in disaster for the English. Nonetheless, the English did not give up on their dreams of empire and soon began to focus on the Spanish colonies in the Americas. So Spain was under pressure from without and within. But what really pushed the country over the edge was the cost of war. Over the course of the 17th century, Spain fought in a series of costly conflicts, including the Franco-Spanish War against France and the Anglo-Spanish War against England. These wars drained the Spanish treasury and left the country exhausted. And so by the end of the 17th century, Spain was a shadow of its former self. Its population had been devastated by disease and war. Its economy was in sharp decline, and its empire was crumbling before its eyes. So why should you care about any of this? Well, because the story of Spain's decline is also the story of the rise of the modern world. As Spain fell, other empires rose to take its place, including the British and Portuguese empires. And as these empires rose, they would shape the world in profound ways. One of the most important legacies of Spain's empire is the spread of Christianity. The Spanish missionaries were some of the most zealous and dedicated of any faith, and they played a key role in converting the native populations of the Americas. Today, the vast majority of people in Latin America are Roman Catholic. Another important legacy of Spain's empire is the Spanish language. Spanish is spoken today by over 20 million people in the Americas and is one of the most widely spoken languages in the world. But perhaps the most important legacy of Spain's empire is the immense wealth that it generated. The Spanish colonies in the Americas were some of the richest and most valuable territories in the world, and they helped to make Spain one of the most powerful countries in Europe. In 1700, the Spanish Empire spanned 2 continents, containing vast riches and countless people. But behind the grandeur, trouble was brewing. How did the mightiest empire in the world suddenly collapse? Let's find out. The 18th century. A struggle to survive. The year is 1700. The Spanish Empire stretches from South America to Spain in Europe. For a century, it has been the most powerful force on earth. But the 18th century would be a struggle just to survive. The King of Spain, Charles II, died without an heir, breaking a bloodline that had ruled for 600 years. This sparked the War of Spanish Succession, with every great power in Europe fighting to place their candidate on the Spanish throne. Austria, France, Britain, and the Dutch all battled to carve up Spain's vast lands. Outnumbered and outgunned, Spain fought desperately to survive. The war lasted for 13 long years, draining the Spanish treasury. Finally, peace was achieved with the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, and Spain managed to stay alive. However, the cost was high. Spain lost many of its European territories, including the Netherlands, Milan, Naples, and Sicily. Their empire was no longer expanding, it was shrinking. But overseas, the empire was still intact, or so it seemed. The Age of Revolutions. Back in the Americas, the 18th century saw the rise of revolutionary ideas. Writers like Montesquieu and Voltaire questioned the divine right of kings. In America, the desire for independence was growing. When the American War of Independence broke out in 1776, it inspired Spanish colonies to dream of freedom. In the early 1800s, wars of independence erupted across Latin America. In Mexico, the Spanish colonial system collapsed, and the country won its freedom in 1821. Then, one by one, other colonies followed. Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, and Chile all proclaimed independence. These revolutions were led by a new generation of Hispanic Americans who combined Enlightenment ideas with local resentments against the empire. Figures like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín became heroes of the independence movement, leading armies, writing constitutions, and establishing new nations. Meanwhile, in Europe, the Napoleonic Wars were at their height. Spain was occupied by French troops, and the Spanish monarchy was in exile. Weakened and distracted, they could not put down the rebellions in their empire. Everywhere the Spanish flag was being lowered for the last time. By the 1820s, Spain had lost most of its empire in the Americas. The only pieces remaining were Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and a few African territories. The end of empire. The final blow came in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. The U.S. went to war with Spain, defeating them easily. In just 3 months, the conflict was over. The Treaty of Paris forced Spain to relinquish its last colonies, and with that, the Spanish Empire was no more. After more than 3 centuries of dominance, Spain's overseas possessions were gone. Legacy. Despite its fall, the Spanish Empire left behind a lasting legacy. Millions of people around the world speak Spanish, a language that helped to spread Christianity and build communities. Trade networks, cultural exchanges, and artistic achievements flourished across the empire. In architecture, painting, literature, and music, the influence of Spain can still be seen today. Yet the empire's story is also one of tragedy. Entire native civilizations were destroyed. From the Inca to the Aztec, their cultures were often erased and their populations decimated. The empire's wealth was built on the brutal system of slavery, which saw millions of Africans forcibly transported to the New World. Untold numbers perished on slave ships or in the brutal colonies. The Spanish Empire reminds us of both the heights of ambition and the costs of conquest. It rose from the desire for unity and vision, reached across oceans, and became the world's first global empire. But in the end, pride, greed, and overreach led to its fall. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, don't forget to leave us a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. You can also check out our other videos and leave us a comment below with your suggestions for future episodes. Until next time, thanks for watching.